to order at 8:30, and we're going to go through our regular agenda, which you can see in front of you, all the different options, all the things we have on Monday. We have a presentation by the LDDA, Julie Townsend, on Monday morning, no proclamations, and then we'll go into our regular agenda with the consent items being the minutes, utility committee minutes, and then finance director. Do you want to go through those now, Mike, or do you want to wait?
Sure, I could, because they're on consent, so I'd be glad to do them now if you'd like.
Sure.
We have two items. This first is an annual process as projects. Obviously, we have projects that carry over multiple years, and so the city manager's office, the finance department, we work with the departments and determine what projects need to be carried over into the next fiscal year, both the revenues and the expenses associated with those items. So that's what this comprehensive list is. There's nothing out of the ordinary at all with these items, and they were vetted with each of the departments.
Still trying to get to my link. Does anyone have any questions? Yes.
Yeah, give us an example of what a few of them are, if you don't mind.
Sure. Well, on the revenue side, in the general fund, the first one that comes up is the targeted economic opportunities. Those are monies that are carried over and revenues that are carried over. And actually, I think Jason's going to be talking about those today. But those are monies that were not expended last year that will be expended in 23. So that's a perfect example, and you'll see that today as Jason talks to you.
Yes. Do you have a question, Commissioner Simmons? Sorry.
No, anyway, so those types of things on the expense side, the downtown master plan, that's something that's, that community development's been working on that is not fully expended yet. So those are items that would just be carried over and expended this year.
Thank you.
Commissioner McCall.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. Mike, is this consistent with years past?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yeah, nothing outstanding at all. If there were questions, we absolutely talked with the resident experts in those departments and or their department heads to make sure that we were comfortable with that. Yes, sir.
Commissioner Simmons.
Do these carryovers represent 1 year or multiple years?
There are some projects on here, for example, Lakeland Electric installing the RICE generators. That will be multiple years worth of projects. That is just going to take a long time to get those implemented, but all of them are just from 22 that they expect to be expended in 23. Yes, sir.
I think that was a really good question. Thank you, Commissioner Simmons. I wonder if, and this is up to you all, as a commission, if we shouldn't walk through these on Monday just for public transparency, since we do have rollovers from year to year. And if you don't see anything that's special, when I read through this on Wednesday, I thought maybe we should do it publicly.
That's totally up to you.
Commissioner Music.
Yeah, and I especially when I know that what Jason and his group is going to talk about, it shows when the money has been allocated but yet not utilized when it finally is, and it's a double. It's because we didn't use it the year before, and I do think having that brought up is probably a good idea, so that anytime we can, every time Ramona's here and she says, this is in the budget, I think it's important to always let them know this is stuff that's been rolled over, so they don't just think that we're...
If you think you're going to come up with detailed questions about every one of these here, I'm going to have to know which department to ask to come to explain their level of detail.
Right.
So if you're looking for detail, I would really ask that I get those questions over the weekend so we can have the right people in there on Monday to go through those.
I think for me, I would want to hear, just what you explained to Commissioner Simmons about the RICE generators, is that, this is something that's long-term and it's something that pops up. I think the question from the public, at least what I hear continually about finance, is that, we just keep sort of moving money forward, and then do we really need it in the budget if we're not using it when it was allocated? And so we're just keeping, kind of a running tab, and I think there needs to be some more clarity on that for the public at large. I don't know if fellow commissioners hear about that as well, but so it would be overarching. maybe not as specific.
So, Mike, if I can, please. A lot of the capital projects, so imagine that our fiscal year, that's what we're concerned of when we reset the budget, but a lot of times that's just really for us internally. So when we're working on projects, transportation projects, think of the ones that we've talked about. They carry over year to year, and it doesn't necessarily worry about our fiscal year. So a lot of the capital projects, they are a long-term projects because they take a long time. So like Providence Road, we've talked about.
Right.
That's going to be one that's in here. Obviously, the Rice engines, we can't do that within the confines of one fiscal year.
There are very, very few, if this helps at all in the questions, there's very few of any operating accounts that are ever allowed to be carried over. And those are special cases such as uniforms in fire department. They are on back order. Well, that's in their operating account. And they have budget for it this year, but they didn't have enough budget to buy all new uniforms again this year. They stagger those purchases over multiple years, so they had to carry that. They wouldn't have enough otherwise. But other than those...
If you're still waiting for a PO to come in, well, we need the money to carry over because we had it to pay. But
Right.
if there is an outstanding, or if there is a balance in your operating, that goes back to fund balance. So that's, to Mike's
Right.
point, is not to buffer your next budget. That's already been accounted for and released.
Yeah, so 98% of everything that is budgeted this year that is operating in nature, that was budgeted in 22, was, if it wasn't expended, went right back to their unappropriated surplus of those funds. And it's only every specific one of those that was carried over or requested to be carried over that was operating was simply because there is no budget in 23 for it, and it is related to a very specific outstanding purchase order that needs to be addressed.
So what's the number, if it's 2%, what's that total cost?
Is it $200,000, if that? I mean, because some of them are, I'm looking here at, firefighting accessories in fire, that was $87,000, but that is directly related to Chief Williams having ordered, firefighting equipment that just has not been received, and we've got the encumbrance for it, but he didn't have the budget for it in 23, again, because he staggers those from year to year. Donations in the police department for the Explorers program, Cops for Christmas, those types of things. They're just monies that are received, put into a budget, and then carried over to the following year because they're going to expend them in December of this year.
Right. Commissioner Music?
I think that, to your point of information for the citizens, what I would like to see would be just a good explanation. But remember that this is what you do for a living, and to do what you can to make it more common, maybe, and extrapolate a little bit, because the more you've talked, the more I've understood it.
Sure.
So to be able to just kind of explain that, because some of it, as I'm looking through, is a decent bit of money, but it's already allocated, already budgeted for whatever the reason is. So I just think that would simplify it a little bit and then show.
Yes, Commissioner Madden.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. Mike, would it be possible, you said that we would have to go to each department to find out more about each of these figures. In future years, is there a best practice with a hyperlink to some of the information so it wouldn't have to necessarily be right here on this document, but if the citizens wanted more information, it would be a little more accessible?
I'm sure that's possible, yeah.
So I think that that'd be something that you could kind of brainstorm among the budget team and among the departments, so that if it is something that's a big number, $1 million, just sitting there, that if it has a hyperlink so that people go, oh, okay, that's, because like Craigo is taking 12 years to build, and, we're buying land and doing these things incrementally. So I think that would help people. When you see such a big number, you kind of think, oh, there's just extra money sitting around. But it's very helpful to know that, and not every department would probably require that or necessitate it, but if that was a best practice within the department, that they have that. It's just data and access to data, quicker access to it.
Commissioner McClellan?
So are you still asking, should we take it off consent?
Yeah.
I think so. I think just for the opportunity for discussion, maybe there's not a lot beyond what we've had today, but at least it gives that opportunity.
Do we need a motion for that, Palmer? Or just pull it off consent?
No, it's just a.
So everybody is good pulling that off consent? Anybody opposed to it? Okay. Thank you. And Mike, I think most of us understand. I think my push is really about the public at large because we do get a lot of questions about where money goes and what that looks like. And to Commissioner Music's point, if you could, explain it very publicly and very clearly, and also with Commissioner Madden, if we can have a game plan for that before strategic plan meeting, maybe, because that's in February, where we have like a deadline of, hey, can you do these hyperlinks and what that looks like? I think that would be helpful as well. It's a really good idea.
Yeah, because people are always looking for extra money.
Yeah.
And how they can spend it.
Yeah.
And so it really does need to kind of show that it's not just extra money, that it is actually allocated for something important and thought through, and, I think.
So that moves to agenda item B, Mike, for the appropriation increase of estimated revenue.
Yeah, so twice a year, we bring items to the commission for approval that were monies that were received throughout the year and then appropriated, auto-appropriated, most of which are reimbursements for certain types of expenses. The larger numbers you see as the Lakeland Police Department provides off-duty overtime to businesses in the community. We receive those monies back. They are auto-appropriated, put it back into their payroll account. Another is donations from private entities, individuals for certain things. So again, nothing out of the ordinary at all on this. So,
Any questions on this item and whether we want to keep it on consent or not?
I think you just pull both of them off and
Yeah, let's
with the
pull them both off.
similar themes and
Everybody okay with that, commission-wise? Okay, so we're going to pull those off of consent. Now we'll go back to our item number 3. Palmer, this will be you, public hearings.
Sure.
Second readings.
2 ordinances for second reading on Monday related to the same property. This is the old 2nd District Court of Appeal property at the corner of Ingram and Memorial Boulevard. One is a small-scale comprehensive plan amendment, and the other is a zoning request. Chuck, you going to show them the maps?
Sure. Really, at this point, what we're showing here is, of course, southeast corner of Ingram and Memorial Boulevard. The zoning change would be a portion of the site from O2 office to C4, which is kind of more of the mid to large range type retail that you would typically find at a retail center like a public shopping center. The land use change would go from public institutional to community activity center, which is the exact same land use as what is found to the west of Ingram and to the north of Memorial. Really, the intent here is to position this site for more of a retail node type development, straight zoning, so that we don't have specific zoning conditions like we would have with the planned unit development. What we're showing here is just kind of what's going on in the surrounding area. The concepts that we have seen from the development team at this point are not inconsistent at all with the surroundings. Searstown to the west, and then the Lakes Church at the mall to the north. So we haven't received any comments in opposition. Planning and Zoning Board approved these changes, and so we're just bringing it forward for final City Commission action.
What are the entrances? Is there one off of Memorial and off Ingram?
Ultimately, those would have to be permitted by DOT, but there is one. There's a right-in, right-out on Memorial Boulevard, and there you go, and an access point on Ingram. And that's one of the things that we've noted in our staff report is that during the DOT permitting process, it's very likely the DOT is going to require cross-access agreement with the Epic Church property to the east. They may require a right-in only off Memorial Boulevard depending on driveway spacing, and so there's a lot that would come out of the DOT permitting process. Because this is a relatively old site, it would be bringing it up to current standards. The other thing that we noted in the staff report as well is that this area was evaluated as part of the Community Redevelopment Agency redevelopment plan that was adopted back in 2001. So the whole area was looked at as being more integrated, pedestrian-friendly, as a gateway into the Midtown CRA area. And so we wanted to make sure that those principles continued forward as well, in any development plans going forward. So that while we don't have specific PUD conditions, the Land Development Code, the CRA plan, and then just the general requirements of the comprehensive plan will get us to where we want to be with the uses and with the form and the layout of the site.
Does DOT have 92 on anything for future renovations or upgrades?
There is
Timeline?
a pending reconstruction project all the way from Wabash to Gary Road that's been kind of in this rolling 6 to 8 year time frame. You can't find it in the DOT work program today as a budgeted project, but our focus at this point has been really west of Lakeland Hills Boulevard in terms of moving the curb line, stormwater reconstruction, those types of things. But we are told that either the concrete will have to be completely reconstructed or the concrete would be replaced with asphalt. So it's just that the road's been shaved down far enough where they need to do some major work on it.
Other questions? Commissioner Ray?
Thank you. John, I guess that site's pretty much already in peripheral service at this point, isn't it?
Pretty much. The building has been demolished, but you still have, the parking. Most of what's out there today is, certainly paved over, but with any development plan, they would have to come in, get a permit from Swift Mud, a drainage permit from DOT, and comply with today's drainage requirements. And so, kind of in reality, the drainage situation would actually likely be better because of the new rules that they would have to develop under.
I just wonder if it's going to put in more contamination in the Lake Parker, because I know all that does drain into this lake.
It shouldn't. As far as between Swift Mud and DOT, I think they're going to be very conscious about what gets into the DOT system and ultimately what would head towards Lake Parker. And certainly Public Works, during their review of any site plan on the project, would have make sure that all of the permitting requirements are also met on our side. So I think those details will be worked out at engineered site plan review.
Other questions? Yes, Commissioner.
Thank you, Chuck. So just, curious on the 2001 CRA redevelopment plan in that area, do we have access to that? Like, did they take a look at, new best practices? I know you're always talking about how you have joint access. You're trying to not have as many aprons going out into the main, thoroughfare, making it more pedestrian friendly. I know we've already put some things in there for crosswalks. I would love to see that bigger picture, because as we have more, hopefully we'll have a lot more redevelopment in this area. And when we do, it's certainly not just looking at a new greenfield of development and using all your best practices. It's kind of retrofitting with those legacy, businesses, and how to create not so much activity coming out at every apron. Is that something we could see?
Sure, we can send a link to the CRA plan. It's primarily policy-oriented and more aspirational. And of course, when it was developed back in 2001, it was before we had our access management standards in the Land Development Code, before the urban form standards were developed in the Land Development Code. And so really, I think that the CRA plans for Dixieland, for Midtown, downtown, and, I think that was kind of the start of looking at how the built environment relates to the transportation corridors and led to some of those other things related to the Land Development Code over the years. But we can send you a link to that.
So when would the access development, and you're talking about kind of the aprons and going out, when was that? What?
We added that in about 2005.
Okay. I just think it's been really helpful. You've been really instrumental in educating this commission to be able to see how that, makes, more traffic problems or mitigates it. And so going forward, it does seem like, this is our second, big project that's going to be happening right in close proximity there on Memorial. And it's exciting, to see that it's getting some love and investment, but it would just be interesting, because I know you're working with each individual developer, but to me, I always use that patchwork quilt example. It's sort of hard to piece all those together unless someone is the mastermind thinking about that thoroughfare at large.
And that's where our team, in terms of looking at the flexibility that's allowed in the land development code, make sure that, like the facades of the buildings, the transparency of the buildings, the placement of the buildings on the site comply with that they're not set far back off of the corridors like Memorial Boulevard, and if they have to be for some other access, sometimes codes end up conflicting with each other, then we've used tools like the knee wall, like at Circle K at 10th and 98, or at Lakeland Hills and Memorial, to try to meet the spirit of our urban form standards. And so it's been, the Land Development Code provides a lot of flexibility that staff and all of our planning team goes through and makes sure that the developers know what their options are, so that if they get a comment from DOT that says, no, your driveway's got to be here, it affects the circulation of the site, that the building or the elements of that site can move around to be able to meet the code.
Okay, thank you. That's really helpful.
Other questions? Okay.
All right, next we actually have two ordinances related to the redevelopment of the Wedgewood Golf Course into residential.
So that was
So
the 1 and 2 were the same.
Chuck, one and two. One is a small-scale comprehensive plan amendment, and two is the zoning related to that. And then, so it's a similar deal with Wedgewood, in that B1, 3B1 is actually a large-scale comprehensive plan amendment related to Wedgewood, and then 6A1 is the zoning related to that. And there are different legal standards relating to these two different ordinances, and I'll just briefly go over that and then let community development describe the projects. The 3B1 is under public hearings because it's a large-scale comprehensive plan amendment as opposed to a small-scale comprehensive plan amendment. A large-scale amendment under 4 laws required to undergo 2 public hearings, so this is a notice public hearing. The related zoning is not required to have 2 public hearings, so that's just a straight first reading. Another thing to note about this is that with a large-scale comprehensive plan amendment, there's a different legal standard than what you've heard me talk about with zoning actions. The courts consider your comprehensive plan a legislative document. So the Lake Miriam item was purely zoning. It was applying zoning to an already existing comprehensive plan designation. But when you're establishing a comprehensive plan future land use designation for a piece of property, the courts consider that legislative, not quasi-judicial, and they're much more deferential to whatever you decide on that. The whole competent substantial evidence, the standard does not apply to comp plan amendments. So it's just legislative. Really, the only standard is you cannot act arbitrarily and capriciously. You have to have some kind of rational basis for your decision, but it doesn't have to be supported by competent substantial evidence. So much more discretion with regard to the comp plan amendment. And then once the comp plan amendment is adopted, then things kind of fall into place more with the zoning ordinance. The other thing I would just say is, I think we all expect this to be controversial. So as with other controversial land use and zoning cases, I would just ask that, make sure you keep your mind open all the way to the public hearing and base everything on what you hear at the public hearing, because a record is being created. And there's always the possibility of litigation in these types of cases. So,
and just for clarity for the public, the first reading, we would have to have public comment at the end of the meeting. It would not occur during the first reading.
Well, the public comment would occur after the first reading on the comprehensive plan amendment ordinance. So under 3B1, that's a public hearing that public comment is allowed to occur at.
Good to know.
Yeah. So with that, I'll turn it over to Chuck to describe the project.
I appreciate it, Palmer, and this is certainly probably one of the more complicated projects we've had over the past 10 or 15 years. And so there's been a lot of public engagement. There's still a lot of concerns that are out there, but there's been to date a lot of public engagement, and the developer has made changes related to that public comment and that public testimony. So there has been a lot of active work on both sides to get to where we are today. And so for that, we're very appreciative. The location in question is the former Wedgewood Golf Course property between US 98 and Circle Loop Road, just in terms of general location, south of Lake Gibson. The golf course closed earlier this year, and so it is not an operational golf course as of today. As you might expect with a golf course, is that we're dealing with various development tracks within the overall golf course area. And so what we'll be talking about are the standards and specific development plans for those individual tracks and how they all fit together in one unified development. But essentially, from a land use standpoint, what we're looking at is going from, we've got, right now we've got approximately 42 acres that is residential low, 78 acres that is residential medium, that allows up to 12 units per acre, and about 8.5 acres that allows up to 75 units per acre, of course, subject to the overall site constraints conditions on the site that would be in effect at the time of development review. So based on today's overall land use plan for the property, you could get around 1,800 units in the golf course area based on the existing land uses that are in place today. From a zoning standpoint, it's a very different situation in that it's really a golf course that is allowed based on the PUD zoning that is in effect today. So we've got the land use component of this, and we've got the zoning component of this that are telling different stories, and we'll be talking about that and the implications here going forward. So the original request that was submitted earlier this year was for almost 1,400 units, primarily multifamily, but certainly some townhomes and single-family detached as part of that mix. But it was a sizable development plan coming out of the box earlier this year. In September, and this was kind of reflecting changes based on public comment and engagement with the neighborhood, the units went from almost 1,400 to 1,208. So there was a reduction from the initial application to what ultimately went to the Planning and Zoning Board the first time in September. 60 single-family units and 1,148 multifamily as part of that development program in September. Now, based on comments and discussion and input at the Planning and Zoning Board, the applicant went back and reduced the unit count further down to what is on the table today at 994 units. It's broken out between 60 single-family detached, 60 single-family attached, and 874 multifamily apartment units. And so that is the development plan that is under consideration at this point in time. Just in terms of highlighting the major changes that have occurred in the last 3 months or so between September and October, and we'll get into individual tracks here in a minute, but there was a sizable multifamily component that was proposed on Track 8, which is the westernmost portion of the development site. Based on comments from the surrounding property owners, that was reduced down to townhomes. So it went from apartments to townhomes. We had a building that was reduced in height from three stories down to 2 stories on Track 10, which is kind of more around the Sandwich Villas area, north of Carpenter's Way and south of Heather Point Drive. We had a number of buildings that were reduced in Track 2 from a 4-story height down to a 3-story height. And that's where you're starting to see the reduction in the number of overall units to what we're looking at today was based on the reductions of those building heights from 3 to 2 or 4 to 3 stories. And again, the overall unit count went from 1,208 down to 994. So the land use change that we're looking at today is really two main components. We are looking at going from residential medium to residential low on roughly 19 acres in primarily the Tract 1 area at the far north end of the golf course property adjacent to the Heather Point residence, the Heather Point subdivision. We've also are looking at going from residential medium to residential high on over 59 acres on the balance of the golf course property north of Carpenter's Way. So as you start looking at the old clubhouse, kind of the area around the Savannah assisted living facility and moving over towards the south side of Audubon Oaks, that's primarily where we're looking at going from residential medium to residential high. The area to the south of Carpenter's Way, including the residential high that exists today in Tract 8, and that was the area that's going from apartments to townhomes. Those land uses remain unchanged. So south of Carpenter's Way, you still have the residential high and then the residential low as you start the balance of the site moving back over towards the east, towards I-4. So what we'll do is we'll, just kind of zooming in here, this is the area where we're looking at going again from residential medium to residential low. You see the platted lots along Heather Point Drive, up adjacent to Lake Gibson, and then Tract 1, how it interacts with that neighborhood. And then Audubon Oaks, the existing multifamily development that was built right around 2000, 2001, is immediately south of that. You can see the layout plan for Tract 1. A big point of discussion with the Heather Point residents was making sure that the lot sizes were compatible with their neighborhood and that ultimately the home designs would be compatible with the neighborhood as well. Because the Land Development Code really it's difficult to prescribe specific designs for single-family homes to be compatible with an existing neighborhood. The focus really was on the lot sizes and making sure that you would end up with a similar product to what exists today. So that's where the lots, the lot count dropped a little bit throughout the course of this plan to make sure that they were as compatible as possible with the Heather Point residents to the north. And so that was a big part of that conversation, and so that's what was shown today. Tract 2, as you start moving south and really kind of nested within the Audubon Oaks development, that's one of the areas where we'll be going from residential medium to residential high. This was the original plan that was provided back this was a revised plan that was provided in September. And based on comments from the developer of Audubon Oaks, there was a revised plan that was submitted back in October that resulted in a small reduction in the number of units and a reorientation of the buildings to minimize the impacts to the existing apartment residents within Audubon Oaks. So one of the concerns was, if you're looking at your apartment window and you're used to looking at a golf course, looking at the side of another multifamily building, that was a major concern and how that reacted with the existing community. And so the developer worked to reorient the buildings, drop the number of units. And so that's a change that occurred based on the discussions at the Planning and Zoning Board between September and October of this year. Tract 3, we're moving south, and what you see here towards the right side of the screen is the right-of-way for the new Lakeland Park Drive extension. So we're getting closer at this point. We're at the low end of the site, closest to Interstate 4, closest to the existing portion of Lakeland Park Drive extension. And so in September, you see the unit count in this portion of Tract 3, 154 lots, primarily 4-story buildings. And really there was not much of a change because that was the furthest part away from the existing homes and closest to the interstate. So this is an area where you didn't see a whole lot of change between September and October. Kind of moving towards the central, really the heart of the development area, north of Carpenter's Way, south of Audubon Oaks, north of Sand Wedge Villas, and the Savannah Assisted Living Facility. You've got tracks 10, 11, and 4. So this is where there were substantial changes we'll get into in a minute, but that's where we'll be looking at going to residential high to accommodate the multifamily core of this development program. So as I noted earlier, the existing future land use can accommodate approximately 1,800 units. And what that translates into in terms of traffic is just over 8,000 daily trips. Now, of course, that's all subject to changing the PUD, but from a land use standpoint, just kind of keep it apples to apples at this point, about 8,000 daily trips. And so it is not insignificant by any stretch of the imagination. The current plan, which would be governed by the PUD, would would drop the maximum trip count to just under 5,700 daily trips. So there's a reduction there, primarily governed by the restrictions that are put into the PUD. Likewise, from a PMP hour, and that's what we focus in on for concurrency purposes, is that we would drop from 624 trips down to 465, again, governed by the PUD. So from a land use standpoint, the PUD would create a reduction in the number of trips, even though the PUD would allow for more intensive development than the golf course that's allowed there today. That makes sense. So I'll pause for any questions.
So far, yes, Commissioner Madden.
Are we going to keep our questions to the end, like if they're just questions?
Are you just going to still go?
We'll still keep going,
Yeah,
and
let's
so
just let
we
him
may
go.
answer some
Got
more.
it.
I just want
Good question.
to provide a pause here. So in the area of, again, around the old clubhouse for Wedgewood, the south central portion of the site, tracks 11 and 4. In September, this overall pod allowed for 540 units, primarily 4-story. By reducing the overall building heights in some of the more kind of central and western portions of this pod, we were looking at a reduction from 540 to 490. Again, a lot of this was reorienting the site to be more compatible with Audubon Oaks, and then in addressing the comments raised by the residents in the area around Sand Wedge Villas and that central portion of the community. So that's where we're going from primary 4-story product, which we still have, down to a 4-story and 2-story type product to be more compatible. So that's where the unit reduction is coming from in these 3 tracks. And again, this is moving over to the west towards Sand Wedge Villas in Fairfield. The 3 stories that you're seeing are being reduced down to 2-story. And so that's a direct result of the testimony provided at the initial Planning and Zoning Board hearing. As we start to move around towards the old clubhouse and closer to Carpenter's Way, again, what you're seeing here is primarily the same development plan, because that is further away from the existing apartments and the existing homes. So there really isn't much change on this portion of Tract 11. So south of Carpenter's Way, really the primary change here is that the Planning and Zoning Board noted that there was a portion of the development site that was owned by SJD, the developer, that was not shown in the master plan. And so you see this little jog in the line at the south end of the Lakeland Park Drive Extension right-of-way dedication area. That is being revised to be within the master plan area. So it's a small notch that was added in, and that was based on one of our Planning and Zoning Board members noticing that was in the same ownership, not included, that is being added in to make sure that that's cleaned up. And again, not much change related to Track 7, which is north of Rockingham, south of Derby, kind of in that area of the south central portion of the overall community. One of the bigger areas of where we saw changes was Tract 8, and that is the existing area that's got a residential high land use that's on the western end of the development site, closest to Corporate Avenue and closest to US 98, but is kind of nested within the loop at Wedgewood. And the representatives of that community expressed concerns about the impacts of having that level of multifamily in close proximity to their community, and there were a number of issues related to utilities that were out there as well that were raised at the Planning and Zoning Board hearing. So based on that testimony and based on the work that was done between this development team and the representatives at the loop at Wedgewood, the project this portion is being reduced from 194 apartment units down to 60 townhome units. So it's going from apartments to townhomes, a substantial number of units being taken out of the plan here. The other thing that has been removed as well is the trail connection between, through this portion of the side, the south portion of Tract 8, between the loop at Wedgewood, kind of subsections or sub-areas, because there were some security and access concerns that were raised by the development representatives of the loop. And so that was taken out and it was addressed. And I think they were generally comfortable with the plan going forward at the Planning and Zoning Board hearing last month. One of the other areas that has been a focus of conversation is Tract 9. And Tract 9 is generally along both sides of Wedgewood Estates Boulevard, immediately east of Douglas Cook Park. The original plan here was for assisted living units to be installed in this area because of concerns raised by the residents, because of, again, public commentary that created a realignment in the road closer to the park. That's been left vacant. As far as that's future development, there's nothing planned at this point in time on Tract 9. If there is a plan for Tract 9 going forward, that would trigger a major modification to the PUD and would have to come back through the planning and zoning process and the city commission. So there were a lot of comments related to this tract, and on the record, we stated that anything that happens here, because right now it's shown as future development area, just like other projects you've seen recently, that's got to come back through the P&Z and the commission for approval. What I also kind of want to take an opportunity to note here too is the developer, in listening to the residents along Staffordshire Drive, actually pulled the proposed alignment of Wedgewood Estates from the backs of these homes closer to the park to create a greater distance between the roadway and those existing homes. And then kind of the center point of all of this is going to be the realignment of Wedgewood Estates to align with Heather Point Drive. Right now there's about a 150-foot setback, and that has been a continuous operational problem for 20 years now. And so getting the roads aligned and a roundabout at this location, we believe is greatly going to enhance accessibility and circulation and address an operational problem that exists today. In terms of phasing, this is certainly a very large project, a multi-year project, kind of much like what we do here at the city. This is going to be something that's going to cover multiple years. The developer's working with water utilities on some pretty substantial wastewater facility upgrades that involve crossing the interstate and connecting over towards Lakeland Hills Boulevard, and that's going to take a lot of time to work through. Part of what we're wanting to focus in on is a kind of a phasing plan with this slide, and it just kind of show that phase 1 right now, out of 994 units, phase 1 would consist of 370 of those multifamily units and 46 single-family units, primarily focused on the area kind of more the southern and the western portions of this, of this property. Of course, that's subject to change. We don't have any conditions directly related to this phasing plan, but it's just really in terms of utility infrastructure, the timing of that, and the timing of the traffic conditions. Those are things that would really dictate the phasing schedule going forward. But this is what the developer has proposed at this point. Then phase 2. 14 single-family detached, 60 of the townhome units, primarily over in Tract 8 over here, and then 274 of the multifamily units against Lakeland Park Drive and the interstate would be that second phase. And then a phase 3 plan is up further north around the Carpenter's Home Cemetery. And so that would be the last phase, the last phase of the development as it stands right now, based on what was provided by the development team. So Todd Vargo, he did a great job in terms of trying to boil this down in terms of showing us what are the now proposed 2-story buildings, the proposed 3-story buildings, and the proposed 4-story buildings as part of this plan, because that is a major concern of the residents of building height, density, and tying that into compatibility with the neighborhoods that exist today in the area. So you see the 2-story over around Sand Wedge in Fairfield, again, directly related to testimony provided to the Planning and Zoning Board. 3-story units in Tracts 2 and one building in Tract 11. A lot of that was related to comments from the Audubon Oaks developer through the P&Z process. and then the four-story units down closer towards the south end of Carpenter's Way, Lakeland Park Drive, and the interstate, as you start to move downhill towards the east. What was important for us, and certainly important for everybody involved, was seeing also how this all ties together with the roadway circulation plan, a trail connection plan based on the existing cart paths from the former golf course, and really how does this all tie together. And so as part of the PUD approval package, we've got exhibits in there laying out the roadway circulation plan, including the dedication of right-of-way for the future extension of Lakeland Park Drive southward from Carpenter's Way towards Dick's Sporting Goods. There's still a couple of other intervening parcels that would have to be acquired to make this connection all the way back down to Lakeland Park Drive at Union, off by the shopping center. But this gets us a very long way into having a viable corridor to continue forward with. Pedestrian circulation plan is shown here. A lot of this is based on the existing golf cart paths from the former golf course. But you see how the development team and really Kimley Horn was the team that put together the hardscape package, the landscape package, the circulation package to show how this all fits together. But we're trying to tie in the apartment communities with the resident, with the single family residential tied into Lakeland Park Drive extension, and ultimately create a grid system for bikes and peds to connect back towards US 98 or back over to Circum Loop Road to maximize the connectivity of the residents of this area. The PUD includes some cross sections depending on street section types. So again, multi-use trails along the streets or separate from the roadways themselves. A lot of green infrastructure, and making sure, of course, is that if we get into the development review process, that the utilities are comfortable, that the specific tree species, the utility placement, the street lighting placement, all those things will get worked out at that time. But for our purposes, this is just trying to outline the general cross sections that would be required, and then the specific spacing and the ultimate design would be subject to the engineering that would occur in the next phase. Again, we've got a landscaping plan that lays out the types of buffers, and the buffers are spelled out in the PUD, so folks would be able to take a look at exactly what is expected in and around their homes today, and in future residents, the same thing. They would have an understanding of how this plan would fit together going forward. Now, of course, transportation is a big part of this, and so I just remind everybody, that what we're tying our conditions to is the comprehensive plan that was adopted by the City Commission. The level of service standards that were used in developing the traffic analysis by Kimley Horn were adopted through the comprehensive plan. What I wanted to show here is that we've been working on this one for a better part of a year now. The original study that was submitted back in March of this year looked at the existing land use. They looked at the trip generation associated with the golf course. They looked at the proposed land uses at that time and provided us with supplemental analyses related to changes made up until September, as well as looking specifically at the Lakeland Park Drive extension for us as well, based on current conditions and the development program. So those are things that have been done to provide additional detail, to kind of provide background on the conditions that we have in the PUD. The study area, we always talk about the area of significance, is that the standard area that we use for traffic analyses is where a project consumes 5% of a roadway's capacity or an intersection's capacity. So as you can see, you get over to US 98, and because we've got an 8-lane roadway, we're not significant on US 98 itself, but there are a number of intersections that were evaluated because of the existing or future connections to that corridor. And then as you get further east, Florida Avenue, Lakeland Hills Boulevard comes into play as the project starts to move towards build out and adds traffic to the east. From a roadway segment standpoint, probably the biggest issue that we saw was Lincoln Hills Boulevard, as you started to get out towards the build-out of the development plan, which was assumed, I think, 2027 in that time frame. The revised analysis showed that actually Lincoln Hills Boulevard would operate just under capacity by build-out, and that's including background traffic growth that would be occurring over the next 5 years. But because of our level of service standards, we're able to average the traffic impacts across corridors. And so for like Lincoln Hills Boulevard, you've got Florida Avenue, which is another north-south road that runs parallel. Florida Avenue carries much less traffic, has much less congestion, but we're able, based on the comp plan, to average the traffic out between those two corridors. And so that was something that, when we looked at it, it passed our level of service analysis here at the city. We've got operational deficiencies that were certainly identified by the applicant at US 90 in Sleepy Hill, US 90 at Carpenter's Way, and US 90 in Lincoln Park Drive. Based on the comprehensive plan policies, that if you've got an overall failure at an intersection, or if more than one public roadway approach fails, then you've got a problem. You've got a failing intersection. Foxwood Estates on the other side of Carpenter's Way, US 98 is private. The Best Buy driveway on the east side of Sleepy Hill is private. And then Lincoln Park Drive and the mall entrance, that's actually public on both sides of US 98. So that was one that we really focused in on from a mitigation standpoint. But what really, I think, helped us, in terms of looking at some different options from a mobility standpoint, was a retiming plan that the applicant actually put together for these intersections on US 98 that certainly ultimately will require DOT approval, but showed that under the background conditions, without the project traffic, conditions would improve greatly by just retiming US 98 to put less of an emphasis on the north-south movement and to provide more emphasis on the east-west movements of these intersections. Again, subject to DOT approval.
Just have a question on that.
Yeah, Commissioner McDonald.
Chuck, if you can, as we get to the next step, the next public hearing, give us an idea of when you say operational deficiencies. I feel like there's a range of like what that could be, as well as the timing, the retiming. You say would improve greatly. Like what would that look like specifically with traffic and just when I think of that in my mind, I think there's a big range there of what that could be. So I'd love just to be able to have some specifics around that.
Absolutely, we can lay that out. And when I talk about operational, it's concurrency. There's almost a legal or a legislative implication of saying that there's a concurrency or a level of service failure.
Okay.
Operational, like Carpenter's Way in 98, that is still a big concern of staff because that westbound movement there backs up. I mean, there's 25 cars. I've been in that queue. 98 Carpenter's Way shows as being congested. The east-west approaches fail. The western approach is private, so it still passes our level of service standards, but there's still a congestion issue that the residents have raised, we're concerned about, and that's something that's an operational problem that we've been talking about internally of trying to address. So I will lay that out and make sure that we're clear, because there's some terms there that we have to be.
Yeah, and to that point, I was going to say at the end that when you say acceptable, I think that needs to be defined as well. Because what's acceptable from a legislative standpoint and from a city planning standpoint may not be acceptable to somebody sitting in the traffic. So we just need to be clear on what that is.
Exactly. We will do that.
Thank you. Thank you, Commissioner McLeod. Is it specific to that? I think he still has more.
Okay, I'll wait.
And just so we're not making this up, this is the comprehensive plan policy language as it is adopted today, and how we break down those intersections. And again, we're still concerned about Carpenter's Way. We don't want the public to think that we've forgotten about that. That is a real issue, and we are looking at that internally on how to best to address that. So Lincoln Park Drive extension, that is a major component of our connectivity needs in North Lakeland. For almost 15 years now, the city has been looking at ways to improve connectivity between Soaker Loop Road and Carpenter's Way. That led to the reopening and the improvements to Carpenter's Way through the Without Walls property over a decade ago. It led to the evaluation and kind of setting the corridor for the Lincoln Park Drive extension north of Carpenter's Way that opened earlier this year. The problem is that connection between Carpenter's Way and the shopping center, the only corridor that was really available was right on top of the Florida Gas transmission easement. And so, as you might imagine there, I know when Greg looked at and worked with FGT back in 2014, it was about a $5 million cost just to mitigate that impact. So that really made that middle section that we're talking about today, and developers working with us on, not financially feasible. And so getting that corridor and then some of the conditions we've got later on really do address that and make sure that we stay away from the gas transmission corridor and again, reducing the implementation costs going forward. But this is the timeline of what we've been looking at in this area. And again, this is a project that's in our comprehensive plan. This is a project that's in the TPO's long-range transportation plan, so it does have standing in those other planning documents. Lakeland Park Drive is not going to be the silver bullet for congestion in this area, but what it does do is it does provide other options to Carpenter's Way for folks trying to get over to 98 or Circle Loop Road. And it kind of rebalances or reshuffles the deck that if you want to get towards the interstate, you can use Lakeland Park Drive and not have to come out Carpenter's Way. But if you want to go north on 98, you can use, what it does is it shortens the travel distances but doesn't reduce the traffic volume, if that makes sense. Carpenter's Way, Wedgewood, States Boulevard, again, getting rid of that offset, that 150-foot offset, creating a roundabout there addresses a major operational issue that the residents have been concerned about now for years. And then the specific concurrency determinations, when we get to the final official concurrency determinations from a traffic standpoint, that would be handled through a separate development agreement that would be go through the city commission process through 2 hearings. And that's laid out statutorily. There's public engagement at that point as well. And so while we are talking about transportation here and we do have transportation conditions from a zoning standpoint, the official concurrency requirements would be laid out in a development agreement that the city commission would adopt following land use and zoning approval. So there's another step in that process as well. Just want to note that from a density and intensity standpoint, we've got good transit service in this area. The Gold Line and the Blue Line operate by the Citrus Connection to the west. The Pink Line operated by them to the east. We've been talking with the Citrus Connection about realigning a portion of the Pink Line to come over, across the bridge into this development, and they would be able to do that when those apartments develop. I think it's in track 3 if I've got the tracks correct. But that would help increase the ridership and improve connectivity into the downtown area. Of course, too, the comprehensive plan lays out our transit-oriented corridors, our transit activity centers, which are the kind of the purple circles here, and it shows that that this area that we're talking about is really between the 2 TOCs and between the 2 transit-oriented activity centers. So again, this kind of fits in terms of more intensity based on proximity to transit service. And of course, DOT has also conducted a bus rapid transit feasibility study for us as well that goes from the mall into the downtown intermodal center site. And so that, again, from a long-range standpoint, having more residents living in close proximity to transit helps us with some of our other longer-term transit goals that have been evaluated by DOT and by the city and the Citrus Connection. So we talked about transit, talked about bicycle pedestrian mitigation, and then an eastern roadway stub out in the vicinity of the Carpenter's Home Cemetery that would provide another way to get over towards Circle Loop Road. If this developer and the owner of the Fields BMW property to the east are able to work out some arrangement, but at least through the zoning here that we're allowing for that stub out, and that stub out is shown on the plan, just to kind of be a placeholder for a future connection that even takes further pressure off of Lakeland Park Drive. There were some concerns raised at the Planning and Zoning Board about operations of Carpenter's Way itself, because you might imagine additional street connections and driveway connections, and what does that do in terms of turning movements? Came to the Horn prepared an analysis that showed that really the turning movements all operate at level of service A. The delays are minimal. The volume to capacity ratio on Carpenter's Way is close to capacity. It's about 85% of capacity, but it's not at capacity. But it gets back to a policy level of service standard and a policy capacity versus congestion. So that's the other thing that we'll be clear on is that Carpenter's Way is congested, but it doesn't fail from a level of service or a legislative standpoint based on the comprehensive plan. And Carpenter's Way will operate at level of service C, so it does pass that grade, even though it is a congested corridor. Again, between September and October, the reduction in units also correlates to a reduction of peak hour trips. So we're going from 540 in the afternoon peak to 465. So we're steadily rationing that traffic down, and that's just based on the developer revising their plans, reducing the unit counts based on the testimony provided through the P&Z. Let me show you the conditions here. The PUD modifications will break out the specific allowed uses per development tract. There, we will address the setbacks, the building placements, again from a form standpoint to make sure that we're compatible with the surrounding homes, the context districts for the overall development. We'll get into the architectural design at a very high level, but still something to help provide better comfort level for the nearby residents and more direction for staff that are reviewing the site plans and the building plans going forward. We're going to have a binding layout plan, and those are the multiple exhibits that are included in the PUD document itself. Landscaping and buffering will be in compliance with the cross-sections that I showed previously, developed by the applicant, so those will be binding as well. We've got access requirements, you might imagine, related to the individual development tracts in the overall plan, again, consistent with the exhibits that are included in the packet. We want to make sure that access is also maintained to the Carpenter's Home Cemetery, so that's one of the conditions we have here, is to make sure that is documented going forward. Civic and open space requirements are also in place for the development. Off-street parking is required in compliance with the Land Development Code, but it's also important to note that we've got language in here that states that if the parking cannot be met based on the standards in the code, then the unit count has to be reduced. So that's the other thing that was a concern fairly early on in the process. Signage, outdoor lighting, stormwater ponds are also included in here as conditions. For the stormwater ponds, we've also received concerns from the residents about how they were going to look, how they're going to be buffered against the existing homes. You don't want to look at a big chain link fence out of your back window between you and the water body. And so what we're trying to do is at least minimize the amount of barriers that have to be placed around the stormwater ponds themselves, but if they do have to be there, that the fencing has to be decorative, be it black vinyl, green vinyl chain link fencing, or decorative metal picket fencing to soften that edge. So you're not looking at a big square, outside the back of your home. Transportation, we've got conditions related to the development agreement and the requirement for that to be able to lock in transportation concurrency. Right-of-way dedication for the Lincoln Park Drive extension, and that would also include necessary stormwater treatment facilities. So, we have the corridor for the road as well as for the future ponds associated with that roadway, and that we also have language that addresses the gas transmission line to minimize the impacts of that, which will minimize the cost associated with constructing the roadway. We also have the requirements for the roundabout at the Wedgewood Carpenter's Way intersection, installation of a transit shelter and a bus pull-off along Lincoln Park Drive when track 3A and 3B develop, which is up there, on the east end of the site. And a very important point here is related to the future update of the traffic analysis. So, we've got a big project. We're sitting here in 2022 trying to anticipate what the traffic impacts are going to be of this development and the changes in the road system. Lincoln Park Drive, opened earlier this year, and that is going to impact the distribution and the traffic impacts of Carpenter's Way and the surrounding network. So as time marches on, we want to have a point at which an updated traffic study has to be provided, and what we're saying here is that has to be provided basically in 2027, and that anything that hasn't been, permits that have not been provided for those development phases by 2027 would be subject to that reanalysis. So we're giving them 5 years, or at this point under 5 years, to be able to to get what they can done and then come back and have that updated study. Talked a lot about the bicycle pedestrian infrastructure. The maintenance of the trails and common areas was something that was discussed substantially at the P&Z, and we're just stating that there has to be a homeowners or property owners association that's responsible for those facilities that are outside of public right-of-way. And so I know that was a lot to go through.
I have a list.
So answer any questions.
I'm going to start with, from the original hands up, Madden McLeod that Reed.
He answered.
You're good? Okay. You good?
No.
Okay. Taking McLeod off the list.
Okay, so Chuck, certainly you answered a lot of questions, so thank you for that comprehensive presentation. So when I've been listening to neighbors and talking to residents, obviously, traffic on Carpenter's Way is big, and a big part of my question was the Lakeland Park Drive and how that mitigates that, and then the development of the phases 1 and 2, where that traffic's going to immediately go and how that will relate. But it sounds like you covered most of that for me, so thank you. And the second thing that I here, obviously, these are folks who've been used to living on a golf course and having, beautiful aesthetic. And so it's interesting to me that, height just is such a popular thing to negotiate in these deals recently. When you're discussing height and numbers of units, certainly that is like a traffic consideration, or maybe an aesthetics versus like contextually appropriate, with me looking out at a tall building. But when you're talking about residents who've been used to large swaths of land, I don't know why you wouldn't just as rather have, a 20-story building and have your green space with your unit count versus just shorter heights. And so, when you think about Lake Mirror, and the parks and the beautiful amenities, it's because you have the taller buildings taking up the density and leaving the green space, for the community. Is that something that you integrate in the conversation that, I know that, I love when you give us pictures of how the landscape buffers look or how far away something looks or how the, intensity of the height affects the neighboring community. To me, I'm just, to load up all the green space with buildings just because they're shorter, I don't know if I was in, getting to have a boat, if that would have been my first choice. I'd rather have a 20-story building and have more green space, but in the same number, affecting the traffic. So that's one question. Then the second question, so that's just like, how do we take in landscapes and views and green space into our consideration of unit count and heights? And then secondly, I have heard some people from the neighborhood worried about stormwater ponds creating flooding. So I think that that's something that you'll probably need to talk about. And I know I mentioned that, in talks, with the developer too, that just to kind of teach people that a stormwater pond is to mitigate flooding, that it won't overflow and create more flooding. So I have heard residents concerned about that, and you certainly have a comprehensive presentation, but that's maybe something that you might want to add only based on what I've been hearing from neighbors, that they're worried about the stormwater ponds being so close to their house that they will overflow and flood their neighborhood. So those were my two, I think, biggest points for today, but I'd love to hear your feedback on it.
I think in terms of building height, and it's almost kind of a double-edged sword, and I think the developer, we want them to also address that from a market standpoint. I don't disagree that folks that are used to living on a golf course, having homes behind them is going to be a huge change. I mean, and even with the buffers and everything, the landscaping plans that are developed by the applicant, that's a big change to what they've been used to for 20, 30 years. What we have seen is multiple iterations of this plan as it's rolled forward over the year, is that the heights of the buildings in certain areas of development have dropped from 4 to 3 to 2, and so there has been some sensitivity from the developer to respect or address those comments related to building heights, even though there are still going to be buildings on the golf course property. I don't know if going to, say, a 6 or 7 or 8-story building and having a smaller number of buildings and taller buildings would necessarily address the residents' concerns, because I think that they're looking at it more as a townhome, single-family development, with Audubon Oaks certainly there, but Audubon Oaks is in the middle of the golf course, and so they are set back far enough from the homes where it really does blend in. I don't know if having smaller number of taller buildings would necessarily address the concerns from a compatibility standpoint. It really would depend on, does that mean that a certain portion of the golf course remains green, and for certain residents, they may see that as a benefit, but if those taller buildings are closer to other homes, that may be a bigger concern.
Well, and I just think that it just becomes the evil villain. The height of the building is in everything that we have had to decide, recently. And, I'm like, okay, so I know that can just kind of plant a seed in your mind, and so then all the discussion then goes that direction. So to me, it's until someone provides an alternative and shows, wow, and I don't know, it could be the developers are like, that's cost prohibitive. I don't want to build anything.
There are economic considerations, particularly with parking, elevators, other things, when you start doing higher buildings. Obviously, the parking, you're still going to require the same amount of parking, and it's much cheaper to provide service parking than the old structured parking, when you're looking at upwards of, $12,000 to $20,000 a space versus, a fraction of that for service parking. And then there's also the suburban context. This is not downtown. And the people that are out there, the units that are there, they were developed in the early 80s. They had that sort of that character from that era. And what we heard from the residents is they want to protect that and maybe retain that as much as possible. So we did not get any sense that they really wanted more open space preserved by going higher, like you suggested there. So that was never part of the conversation.
Well, that's what I mean.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's a blind spot that people aren't considering that, or if they actually don't like that. But I would like that to be considered, because as you get over towards the BMW and, I-4, I'm just curious, if I was looking at the land and I thought that's way over there, and then I still get all this green space, you get your number of units and the same number of parking spots and the same traffic, but I retain green space. I'm just saying I would like that to be another thing that, we kind of, when we get to see things, we often talk about, traffic is what we hear, and we hear, buffering and contextually appropriate heights. Going forward, I know, my colleague here is like, we need green space, And so that's a beautiful amenity as well. And so if I took all of those blocks that I see on that paper and put them into one tall building all the way on the furthest point of the development, and I had lots of green space in between, if that was an option, I wonder what I would pick, is what I'm saying, but it's not an option that's presented. And so I just think that, you're brilliant at bringing in so many points to make a better quality project, and that height is something that we should think about as, not just in our urban core, but especially when we have a beautiful environment, lakes or ponds or green space to consider, more buildings and more surface parking lot. So that you have a shorter building, I just would like that to be a component in the conversation as to what makes these, developments more beautiful. And then, did you have a comment on the stormwater?
In terms of the stormwater, certainly, and kind of hate the standard answer that we defer to other permitting agencies like SwiftMud that will be reviewing the plans, but also our own Public Works Department, will be reviewing, the site plans or the plats as they come forward, and the stormwater systems that will be submitted for review. And so there is going to be a much more detailed engineering level review by the SwiftMud agency and the city's Public Works Department that will address and ensure that the ponds are appropriately designed, the stormwater infrastructure leading into those ponds and coming out of those ponds are appropriately designed so that they don't cause flooding around the surrounding homes. As part of that, and even during construction, Public Works has a very strong set of inspectors that also are out there during construction to look at what's actually being constructed. Once the infrastructure is finished, they're also, they walk through with the developers to make sure that everything is built per the plans. There's a maintenance bond that's put out there, and for some period of time after the completion of the construction as well, that, there are some safeguards that are built in that we even control locally that should hopefully put the residents' minds at ease that, what we're seeing here are, frankly, the pretty pictures and the broad level of numbers of units, but, there's going to be a much more complicated set of development reviews that occur following zoning approval, if approved, that are going to get into the nuts and bolts that the residents are concerned about.
And I think it's just important to, because I think they think that the developer wants to add the pond. Most developers don't want to pay to add a pond, and they'd rather, it's really to mitigate the flooding and stormwater, so instead of them thinking that would be a more concern for flooding. So since I've heard that, I just would love if someone would speak to that.
And I'll aspect too, is there anything that anything else we may have missed in that explanation that from a public works standpoint that we would?
No, I think you've covered it well. The whole idea behind the ponds is not so much to stop the flooding, but to treat that water and to dispatch it, where SwiftMud, when they do their reviews, is going to require them to match what's currently existing out there today. So, that developer's going to have to build an adequate sized pond or ponds, as well as a conveyance system to be able to get that water to the ponds and then on off the site. Eventually, everything's going to make it down to, at least north of Carpenter's Way, we'll make it down to our ponds that are there on the north side of Lakeland Park Drive and then under the interstate onto Lake Crago. So, but there'll be a thorough review of that, so there shouldn't be any issue. As well as Chuck said, we have staff that will be following the construction to ensure that it's built according to plan and then certifying it upon completion. So.
Thank you. Commissioner Reed.
Thank you. I have some
Very patient.
observation and some questions. Do I understand somewhere in the process, this will get transmitted to DCA? When will that happen? After we bless it or before we bless it, or is it going on now?
What we will do is, because we're a certified area, and this land use change is within the certification area and is not tied to an annexation, what we will do is we will provide that to them more or less as a courtesy, stating that it's exempt per our certification agreement from 2012. And we have the ability to come back and adopt it immediately. So we will send it to them, but it's not going to be a formal transmittal for a coordinated state review. It'll just be sending it to DEO, the Department of Economic Opportunity, and saying that this is exempt per our agreement, but here's what the city commission will be asked to adopt. There is an appeal period and an effective date period beyond the city commission adoption, so that if the commission were to adopt the land use change on December 5th, there's 31 days after that stakeholders, other folks could file an appeal or a challenge to that decision. But if not, then it becomes in effect 31 days after that. So that, in essence, in our case, kind of serves that same purpose.
Okay, thank you. Because, Stephanie, to answer your question, maybe an optical illusion. The property kind of flows to, it's low on the north and southeast and the northeast. So some of it's going to flow to Lake Parker, the balance is going to fly to Lake Crago. So, and I think that's what they're making the multi-story to 4 units are kind of down in the valley, I guess you'd say, to make them more level. With the 3 stories, or that's to do that component. But I'm glad Greg is here. We use that little area to go through to 98 to circumvent 98 Griffin Road all the time. And when you come over the bridge, you better be careful, because you better hit the brakes, because did we got some kind of slow down sign on this side of the bridge? Because when you come over, that stop sign is right there.
We do have advanced warning signs. I want to say
I didn't see it.
on northbound, it is
Because you were going too fast.
I think it's right.
Nobody else said it, I was going to.
I want to say the advanced warning sign is south of the south edge of the overpass. So after you,
once from the north, it's not a problem, but from coming from the south, going north, I mean, when you come over the crest, it's there.
Yeah.
well, I'll have it double checked, but there is an advanced warning sign with a flashing red at the top of it, and then we'll check the distance as well.
All right, thank you. That's just one brief observation.
Okay.
And Chuck, then on Heather Point, that's a private road. I know we recently gave them a loan to facilitate some drainage and stuff there. I presume none of this other stuff's all going to be private, public roads?
That, right now, the intent is anything off Carpenter's Way or off the existing street system would be private, except for Lakeland Park Drive extension from south of Carpenter's Way. So the intent is everything else that's being built internal to the development would be private.
So they can fence gate it and stuff like that if they want to, okay.
As long as they don't back traffic out onto the public road system, they can regulate it.
I think it's imperative in phase one at track number 9. That little intersection right there there's going to be a big, about where the roundabout would go. I think that needs to be incorporated in phase one. To your left more, right up, blue left, right there.
Oh, yeah, there we go.
That is a terrible intersection. You've got to be real careful getting out, going to if you're going to take a right or left, because there's almost a blind curve, and I think that needs to be in phase one. Personally, especially the amount of traffic is going to be going to the south, going north, that's going to become a critical area of concern from my standpoint, and I think we need to see if we can get them to do that in phase one. Let's see, what else? And I guess that's really about it for right now. But those are just the big points, and obviously they've made some big changes in the densities, so it's going to be interesting to see what, and it looks like the parking's pretty good to me from our standpoint.
We told them to make sure they had those details
I thought you were
there.
going to ask Commissioner Simmons.
Yeah, just one question. I see that the developer has been sensitive in mitigating some of the concerns of the residents. What are some of the remaining major objections that the residents have?
I think the major issues probably are in two categories. One is traffic congestion and the impacts of the road on Carpenter's Way itself and at US 98. And then I think the other part of it has been density and compatibility, the 4-story units relative to the existing neighborhood townhomes and single-family homes. Those are probably the two broad categories that remain the biggest concerns, that you'll hear about. I think probably the other part of it is just the overall redevelopment of the golf course and the impact to the homes that have been there, some of them since the 1980s. So, I mean, redeveloping a golf course, that's a big deal. But then the traffic impacts and then the compatibility density side of it are the two kind of specific columns of concerns that we still continue to have, and I'm sure you will hear about at the hearings.
Do you have a sense of percentage of the residents in favor or not in favor?
It's kind of hard to say. I mean, I think probably a vast majority, at least that you'll hear about, are concerned, probably to the level of being opposed. And I don't think that's unusual for this scale of a project. And typically what we hear is there may be a few that support the change. Because what are the other options? There's a golf course that's right now vacant and it's not operational. So what are the negative impacts of a golf course that sits fallow for the next period of time?
Bridgewater.
What are the impacts of that and the concerns that would come up maybe down the road? I mean, you're not going to hear those concerns immediately, but they would come up, we're going to start seeing upticks in requests for code enforcement action and other things related to that, but you're not going to hear that now. I think just because of the change from golf course to development, and that's going to have a fairly automatic negative response from the folks who live out there and have lived out there for a long time. I will say, though, that I've been extremely impressed with the types of comments and the types of questions that we've been getting from the residents out there. They've done their homework. And so what you will hear, if not Monday, certainly on the 5th, will reflect that. They've been at the hearings, they've looked at the documents. The developer has had, at least a couple of meetings with the residents and the HOA representatives. So there's been some back and forth there. But the residents, they've done their homework, and they're going to have some specific pointed questions and concerns that you'll hear from them.
Commissioner Music.
Yeah, just really echoing Chuck's comments. That's the toughest thing I think that we deal with is redevelopment of something of this size, because the scale is so large. But, I try to not only respond to the customers that reach out to us as a group or me individually, and try to understand and put myself in their shoes and have compassion. I mean, again, if you've lived out there since the 80s or 90s and all you've seen is green space, and then it's going to go away. The unfortunate thing is the golf course has been sold. It is going to become something. So it's trying to figure out how do we get from where it is now to where it's going to be. But it is interesting though when you think about density. I mean, I think there is the two different parts for me. There's the density, and then there's the traffic overlay. Is when you go onto Google Earth and you zoom on it and pull back. I mean, that area is surrounded by density. It is the less dense area in that, in that geographical region. So obviously there's what's that?
Funny you bring that up.
Yeah. So, so then it's how do we balance it? How do we take the green space redevelopment where we are compassionate to those who have lived around there, but yet continue to do what we know we need to do, which is have housing in this area, because we're under stock in our housing and townhomes and apartments, and so it's just tough. But great presentation. I think and I'm excited that, to echo your comment that what you're getting is not just, I hate the development, it is details, thought out, things that somebody can actually answer, which is great.
And I'm very appreciative of the work that Todd Vargas put in as the case manager for this project, as well as Matt Lyons. I mean, they're the ones that have been really dealing with the day-to-day, answering the questions, working with the developers, getting to the specifics that were reflected in the exhibits that are in the PUD. And so I'm very appreciative of the work that they have done, because that has been hours and hours and hours and hours of work with the neighborhood and with the developer to get to where we are today.
I have a question for Mr. Anderson. Can you talk to me about water and wastewater up there and what our infrastructure looks like currently, and then how this is going to impact it?
So currently, we are restricted, if I'll use that word, on the wastewater side. We have a pump station just to the, I guess it would be southwest of the current clubhouse, across, Carpenter's Hill Way. That is, I think, the major restriction there, and then the pipeline, the force main leading from there, going underneath I-4 to Lakeland Hills Boulevard, going used to be to our north side pump station up there by Home Depot, and then that would turn around and pump back up to our north side wastewater plant. If you recall, what we've been working on, what we just did was what we call a Lake Crago turnaround, capturing that flow and turning it. So from Lake Crago north to that pump station, and Chuck, correct me if I'm wrong, that is the upgrades that will be needed somewhere in there. I can't speak to specifics at this point, what we're looking at. Quite honestly, I don't know. But there are upgrades needed at that pump station and the pipeline feeding down to Lake Crago.
Are you concerned?
Concern from a what
volume standpoint?
If the upgrades are made, no, that is a typical developer burden, if you will, to make those upgrades to serve that development. I don't know if I'm...
and that's part of, and that's one of the things that we've been communicating with the residents is that, the zoning is one set of issues, but then the infrastructure review for each phase, that's got to go through an engineering. I mean, there's only so much water or wastewater you can get through a pipe. And so, and if that pump station can't handle it, I mean, there's some true points at which the development can't move forward until those upgrades are made. And so that's a lot of the behind the scenes work that's happening right now on the engineering side.
Here's a better question. Are we behind now?
Not after that, we're not behind, no. But adding flows to that pump station and to the pipeline, yeah, that's where those upgrades would need to happen.
Okay, thank you. It was great. It's awesome. I like to sleep over water. Commissioner Madden, you have something else?
So I just wanted to comment on, Chuck, I'm really excited about the signalization work on 98 North, even though it's a private road, and I was trying to process that in my mind, like it being private, and so therefore it's a little bit more difficult. But, since Traffic Ops is working on our same thing here, with the Dixieland Road diet, it's always the west-east. I took a picture this morning again of red. I can't even get 4 blocks from, if I go the back route, Missouri, on my bike even, I can't get 4 blocks because of the signalization. West-east is really the problem in our downtown, and I know they're working on that. So who all would be a part of that west-east signalization? Because in my mind, all of a sudden, I'm like, oh my gosh, you got this huge artery that's always been north-south prominent. But adding all of that density west and east, of course, they would sit there forever, letting that flow go north-south.
And it's really going to be our traffic operations division and working directly with DOT. Ultimately, DOT has veto power. They're going to have to say over the major changes to the signalization on US 98. And we've seen with all the, hundreds of millions of dollars of investment going on north of here towards Dade City, they definitely want to move traffic on the 98 corridor. I think the issue is that what we're trying to do is at least provide them with data that shows that there is a significant impact to, local residents trying to cross US 98, and here are some things that can be done to improve that situation. You can't approve a new timing plan today because things change over time, and really DOT is going to want to see what the existing data is when they do their normal retiming plans for these corridors anyway. So it's
kind of
iterative.
benchmarking it.
Exactly.
Okay.
And so it will be a longer term type deal, but it shows that it can work better if the timing is more equitable for the east-west traffic and addresses certain specific turning movements. The problem too is 98 is an 8-lane road up in most of this area as well. So there's a lot of inefficiencies that are built in because it's a very wide road and things that the engineers can speak to better than I can, but that's kind of what we're working with as well.
Well, and so obviously you talk about pedestrian, and I'm not thinking about, trying to make 98 pedestrian friendly as much as I'm thrilled about keeping the golf cart path and, even being a golf cart community, I love the golf carts. So I was talking to the developer to make sure there's access to Cook Park, but is there also access that's friendly to pedestrian and bikes to get to all of those retail and commercial and Dick's? What do those look like? And are they all under 30 miles an hour so they could ride their golf cart all the way? Could we get a squeeze there from this neighborhood to the Dick's Sporting Goods store?
In terms of golf cart usage, I don't think there's anything that would prohibit. Lakeland Park Drive Extension is a collector road, and I think we would just need to sit down and make sure that I think the speed limit's low enough where that there probably isn't an issue for any
Almost on the
road-based.
research, has to be 35 miles an hour or less.
back out.
There are some limitations to use of golf carts in public right-of-way. Homer can speak more to that, but I know we've looked at it several times as a result of things out of Sandpiper. We're trying to develop that interconnectivity for pedestrians and bicycles. So when we built Lakeland Park Drive extension, we've got the 10-foot multi-use path, which we're planning to continue all the way over to Ford's Garage.
Right.
When we add that addition, so that gets you from 98 back over to Carpenter's Way, and then eventually we'll have some connections to get you back towards Lake Crago. And when we do some projects through those neighborhoods there, but it's been taking a long time.
Can you drive your golf cart to Lake Crago from this development?
You can ride your bike or walk. I don't know about driving your golf cart.
Your LSV.
Crossing 33 is probably the big issue there.
Okay, I might move there after this, so I can drive my golf cart all this places.
Any other questions? I have one for Palmer Pitt. Okay, on my magic Mayor Pro Tem thing, it says that this will be a roll call vote. Why are we doing a roll call vote on the first reading?
That should not be roll call. It's no action on Monday.
That's what I was thinking, and that's why I was confused. Okay.
You do have to open it up for public comment, but there's no action that the city commission takes. You're
I just was
listening.
a little confused. I've never seen that before. So thank you for clarifying that. Any other on this topic? There's no report from CRA, so we'll move to city manager and our deputy city manager, Emily Clem.
Okay, so this is for the city's health plan stop-loss reinsurance coverage with FOIA. So we are looking to go with FOIA another year. We solicit this through our broker, and it is based upon our history. So remember, we are self-insured, and so any single health claim that exceeds $435,000, that is what triggers this to reimburse us. So it's a protection for the city. United Healthcare, which is our health insurance, they have to notify the carrier anytime we pass the 50%. So when we're getting 50% closer to the 435, they notify Voya. So then when you go out for this, they know kind of what their risk is. So right now, as of August, I should say, there was 7 claims that had surpassed the 50% mark. One of those claims had already exceeded the $435,000. So that's what drives the rates for this. And we pay per member per month. So, and it's based upon actual. So right now, it is estimated at 2,350 employees and retirees on the plan. So that is where the annual premium of $1,060,320 number comes from. And I have Joyce Dias here, which is our risk management director, if you'd like to discuss further.
Any questions? All right. Thank you. Seeing none. You got it.
I tried to explain as much as I could to you. What is that question?
Happy Thanksgiving, Joyce. Okay, now we're back to Palmer for city attorney ordinance.
Okay,
So we just went through A1.
You don't want to go over that one again. That's Wedgewood as well. 6A1's Wedgewood.
But she knows a lot about Wedgewood.
So we can go to miscellaneous reports.
Okay, so under miscellaneous, there are two separate agreements there, but they're both related. There are our first 2 agreements under the city's relatively new Economic Development Infrastructure Incentive Program, and Jason is going to introduce that. I know we have some representatives of the companies that are involved, and as well as LEDC.
I'll sit here real quick, if you don't mind. Yeah, good morning. Thank you, Palmer. Appreciate it. Sorry to pull up the table here. I hope you're excited about, 2 things Palmer said. So, new incentive that we're finally accessing using, but I know Commissioner Reed mostly to look and see that we can talk economic development. We don't have private names and code words, and we've got real companies that are here with us. So we're excited about that. So 2 exciting projects we just want to talk about real quick. One is an existing expansion of a local company that is already here. One is an international company that is moving to Lakeland. Both of these companies have applied for the city's Economic Development Infrastructure Incentive Program. And so as part of that, both city staff and many with the utilities and others in the room here have been working with, along with LEDC, have been working with these companies for the better part of a year, progressing along. Each of these projects are moving forward under construction at their current stages and probably looking for completion maybe second half of 23. So as we go through that process, we wanted LEDC to be here with us. We've got representatives of the company that we will introduce and engage for questioning. But backtrack real quick before Katie hits some slides. I wanted to at least go back and talk about this incentive. I know we've got some different faces and some new things around the table. This came from the City Commission Strategic Retreat in February of 2019. And so at that point in time, there were discussions about an economic development incentive program that was geared more towards infrastructure. If we look at a return on investment, we use that a great deal in that terminology. If we look at projects that we incentivize from logistics and distribution as a category, office as a category, and then manufacturing, manufacturing was one that we really did not incentivize much in a lot of companies to either recruit and come here or to grow. Based on that, we look at cities that are in the utility business like we are. And so obviously when we talk about that return on investment, it's value to the community, but it's value to the businesses. We benefit from utility customers, large utility customers, the ratepayers on taxes, and then the tangible side of what manufacturers bring to us. So at that time, the commission talked about a $500,000 annual incentive that would be funded through Lakeland Electric, water utilities, and a little bit through the general fund. And so that started, FY21 has been building, as you heard Mr. Brossart start with the carryovers. these are the first projects that have been eligible. And we've had other projects that we've worked with, but this is not just giving money away. There's a lot of criteria, a lot of specifics that we go through to vet through and find the right projects that really fit Lakeland and what we're trying to do. So the last points on that, we've got sheets just on criteria. So some of the things that we would be looking for to qualify for this, it's based on number of jobs, or it's based on the volume, the amount, the wages that companies are paying, or total capital investment for the projects. Each of the ones we're looking at today really qualify under that capital investment level, but I think one or both really do meet some of the job criteria as well that Katie will go through. And so what is this money for? When we talk about manufacturing, we've heard from developers, we've heard from people in the past of projects that have a gap at the very end. So if we talk about maybe really high utility impact fees, not development, but utility impact fees for water and wastewater. Some of the needs to relocate water lines, electric lines, undergrounding power. You heard Bill Anderson talk about upgrades to substations and utility pumps, other things that's going to help the volume and flow of capacity. Those are all things that are intended for this money to spend, and really with the idea that we are incenting in the businesses. We're excited to have them here and want them to grow. But the more that we can put into the infrastructure itself, it's going to better the overall system. So with that, I'll stop for a moment, reintroduce Katie. Katie's got a couple slides that really get into some of the details about the projects themselves. And again, we've got representatives here that can really talk about some of the specifics of what they're bringing to Lakeland.
Thank you, Jason. Well, good morning, Mayor Pro Tem and Commissioners. And I would also like to commend the staff who's worked very hard on this project. These projects, Jason and Palmer, for helping us on how we are going to execute your vision on creating that manufacturing incentive. And so first we're going to talk about Keymark. And I have two representatives here with me today. Joe Crenna, who has been with Keymark in Lakeland for several decades. And Brandon Clark, who you'll hear about, is helping to move this project along with the Ruthven Company. So Keymark was established actually in New York in 1946. They are a manufacturer of aluminum extrusions for an array of U.S. industries. And if you are not sure what that is, I put a picture for you. Custom aluminum parts for an array of and variety of companies. In 1998, Keymark of Florida opened a 100,000 square foot facility at 2540 Knight Station, which is their main campus, if you will, in the Lakeland community, creating 100 jobs and $15 million just in equipment and capital investment. In 2000, they added a second extrusion press, which expanded the facility to 150,000 square feet and added $7 million in equipment. In 2008, another major investment and upgrade to their 40-foot line. In 2010, 106,000 square feet of production space was added to accommodate a third press, increasing the footprint to 256,000 square feet. And in 2014, $2.5 million in capital investment to upgrade the largest press. And so today, Keymark employs 340 people in the Lakeland community, 75% of which live in Polk County. So this is a company that has been around for a long time in Lakeland and has reinvested many times over in terms of their capital investment in their ROI for the city in utilities and electric. And so the time came for them to expand again. And so they really began looking at their existing facility. So this project is really two parts, but we're looking at it as one project. A new extrusion press will be added to the existing facility at Knight Stations Road. That is a capital investment of 10 to 12 million at that particular facility. But what that did is create a need to relocate and expand some of their functions at that site as they expanded their press. So they were looking around Central Florida at different locations. And of course, they've been a longtime Lakeland company. We would want to keep them in the Lakeland area. And so we were fortunate that the Ruthven Company was able to locate a site that is located at 3155 Drainfield Road. And they will be constructing 76,000 square feet for a vertical paint line, 25 new jobs in the Lakeland market, $14 million capital investment in the building, and up to $10 million in capital investment in equipment within the building. So all told, you're looking at a capital expenditure of $36 million for this particular project. And just to orient you, that is the site outlined in yellow there, and you can see the airport and the airport terminal there. And so Jason talked about what the eligible uses for this particular program are. And in this particular case, the applicant has moved towards relocation of water, wastewater, and electric transmission lines, more of the infrastructure side, infrastructure improvements and electric transformers and dual feeds. And so at early kind of estimates here, they're looking at $576,000 in cost. Of course, that's subject to change, but that's right now what the estimates are. And then we have supported the $400,000, which is the maximum per project for this. If you look at a $36 million capital investment and an incentive of $400,000 towards this project. And then the second project that we'll be discussing today is Frenza. Today I have with me Otis, who is the managing director of the Lakeland facility, and then Lindsay, who is employee number 2, I guess, the HR director. And we were joking ahead of time. Lindsay actually started her career at the city of Lakeland, working in the public library, and she has a swan tattoo on her arm. So you can't be more dedicated to Lakeland than Lindsay is. So, but to give you a little bit of background on Frenza, it was founded in 1961 in Spain. They're one of the world's leading canning companies and supply European retail chains with both the private label as well as the brand you see on your screen there. And over the last several years, they really started to investigate opportunities to move into the North American market. And so for those of you that aren't as familiar with how that process works, companies that are looking to come to the United States many times work through state economic development agencies. So they introduce themselves to Enterprise Florida. Enterprise Florida reaches out to all the local economic development organizations like the LEDC, and we all go to work to try to say, pick us, come see us, see what we have to offer. That's where something like this manufacturing incentive is important, because it sends a message that we are interested in people bringing manufacturing jobs. They tend to have a higher percentage of pay above the average median income, high skill, high wage. They typically have a corporate component that comes with them in some way, shape, or form, and they bring a lot of equipment, which even increases the ROI and also the likelihood that they will stay in market. So those are a lot of the reasons why manufacturing are great pieces to bring to this community. So they worked with Enterprise Florida, as I said, and we went to work setting them available sites, and one of those sites is 900 North Chestnut Road in Lakeland North Business Center, which is 2 brand new buildings there by Kathleen High School. So it's a 180,000 square foot facility, 110 to 115 new jobs that'll be coming to market at this point, and potential of 5 manufacturing lines at full build out, which has grown from the initial, we were talking about 2 manufacturing lines. So that speaks to the demand for the product and their ability to grow their contracts within the United States. So total CapEx, probably in the low end of estimation, is $21 million to $23. Otis and I were just talking yesterday. It's probably going to be more realistically around the $30 to $35 million. However, they're working on layout and how that would build out in that building. And so this is the site here outlined in blue. For frame of reference, Kathleen High School is across Memorial Boulevard there. And then this is a front-facing view of the facility. And this is where I have to really give a huge shout out to Bill and his team at the utility department. They have been very involved in this project to make sure that we have the capacities that can fit this project, that we can leverage this project to make improvements for the corridor as well. And so in that case, their water and wastewater impact fees will be upwards of $2.5 million or more. and probably in the or more category. Bill's shaking his head, yeah, or more category. And so, based on their capital investment over arching capital investment, as well as what their utility impact fees will be long-term, the LEDC felt that requesting the max for this project at 400. And as Jason said, we really look through and vet projects that we think have the biggest ROI. We're not looking to incentivize everything to everyone. We're really looking on being targeted when we utilize this incentive to make sure that we're executing in a way that meets the letter of intent of what you all voted for. And I think that is my last slide.
Yeah, I agree, and we want to see if anybody has any questions. But as we look at keeping Keymark here and the commitment that they've had to the Lakeland community for such a long time, we hear about Frenza and Otis and the what-ifs that might happen by them making an expansion and coming stateside and then picking Florida. We've talked about corporate opportunities and a number of things, and however, if you were comfortable saying anything or communicating, just we're excited about the opportunity to get this project moving and to get you open.
Well, thank you all for the time here today. I think one thing to share is that we did have a pretty cumbersome search as to where we wanted to be. We looked at several cities within the state of Florida even, and it was a resounding, clear decision to come to Lakeland. Starting with the Lakeland Economic Development Council, the city of Lakeland, the mayor, the congressman all supported us. So for us, we knew that was something that was going to be critical because we want to foster a long-term relationship here with the community. We want to stay here for the span of our time in the United States. I would also share, too, that based on the feedback we've gotten from customers, we would like to consider moving our global headquarters here to the United States and Lakeland as well. Our focus is going to be to partner with local folks. Our second hire is with and from Lakeland, and we're also going to be committed to partner with local companies as much as possible as well. We're using local architects, local engineers. My vote is for a local general contractor who's just around the corner here as well. So we're very excited about the project. I think the only other thing to share with you is that our organization is family run. We are not in Barcelona, we're not in Madrid, we're in a city called Rivera, which has 30,000 people and has that same essence fiber as Lakeland. So that's why we fell in love with this community as well. And we're excited. Our first products will go on sale here on Amazon Fresh. We're manufacturing their products. So please buy them as soon as you can. They should be online here today or tomorrow. And we're talking with Kroger, Walmart, and Ahold Delhaize, several other large customers. So all of that will bring to Lakeland as well. So thank you for the time.
Thank you. All right, questions, Commissioner Reed and then McLeod.
You can have them. I like tuna fish, so I'm looking for more fun to catch though, but anyway. What will your average employee, what would they pay? What would your average job be just for?
So we, for the 115 employees, are estimating about $55,000 is the average pay, a little bit north of there. I think for us, our total investment in employees as we look at the 5 lines is close to $4.5, maybe $5 million. But I think it's also important to share about what we want to do with employees. We want to foster a long-term relationship. We don't want transient workers. We've talked about having the best when it comes to medical coverage for employees, the best when it comes to 401k, and the best when it comes to making sure that the folks come and feel a part of the community as we do as well.
Thank you.
Commissioner McLeod.
Well, thank you. Welcome to Lakeland. Jason, just to clarify, so these two are the first manufacturing incentive projects to come to us since 2019.
Since 2019, these are the first two.
Before several of us were on the commission. So that's exciting to see.
Absolutely.
To see these projects. And I was just curious, you're talking about the jobs, both companies. Can you tell us a little bit about the types of jobs that, will come along with the expansion or the new plant?
Well, at Keymark, we've been in Lakeland since 1997. This project, one of the keys to us expanding in Lakeland was we absolutely needed the ability for future expansion too. We were out of room at our current site, so we were looking around Central Florida for a place where we could further expand. Our initial building on Drainfield Road will be just for a painting operation, but it also allows us to add 2 more extrusion press lines, which could add, upwards of another 100 to 150 jobs on top of what we already have now. We're a manufacturing company, metals manufacturing. We have anywhere from entry-level jobs that, they average maybe $17 an hour before overtime, all the way up to high-level maintenance techs, managers, supervisors. And I will say one of the things I am most proud of since 1997 is our leadership in our plant is all homegrown. Absolutely every single manager and supervisor, except for maybe in maintenance, is all homegrown. People that literally started out, at the entry level. And, that is one thing I'm very proud of. So the last year, we've been aggressively raising our wages and our benefits. It's a fact of life these days. The market has supported it so far, so I hope that answers the question.
That's good. That's helpful. Thank you.
So for us, we will have manufacturing and corporate positions within the facility. So for the corporate positions, we have Lindsay with HR. Then we are also going to have finance, logistics, supply chain. We also will have from there QA, R&D, and then everything that supports the office environment. For the manufacturing facility, we'll have a manufacturing director, his support team, and technicians, engineering technicians. For each line will have between 9 to 15 hourly employees that help support the lines. And then we'll also have the folks that are managing the logistics part of the facility. So pretty diverse in terms of what we're working. I know Lindsay's working very hard. Our next hire, we hope to be the plant director, then 3 engineering technicians, then the warehouse manager, and then we'll go from there.
That's good. Thank you.
Commissioner Music?
Yeah, I just want to say thanks for just the hard work you guys do. When you have a criteria and you wait until somebody hits that criteria and does it, it's when we are asked to give money for things and then we look at the end and we see the result, I think that's good. But I don't want to gloss over also when you talk about Brandon and your team, building a building and the infrastructure you guys are going to do. For a large part of it, you guys are hiring local people and, the people that are building the company, so they're taking their money and paying their mortgage and getting gas and buying food, and so the trickle down effect of that money is just amazing. It's easy when you're in these businesses to spout out 20-30 million like it's nothing, but to take that and really break it down and to say that there are people here that are going to have their livelihood because of the work that everybody here has done together. I like it. That's good stuff.
Any other questions or comments? Yes, Commissioner Reed.
Mike, how much do we have in these funds to give out now? This is like 22 and 21, because it's $500,000 a year, right?
1.3 million.
So we can, if no one comes along, we have some money left over for 2 more, basically.
That's part of the carryovers.
That's what I was referring to.
Yep.
Good transparency, Mike.
Mike's hyperlink to our.
That's right.
Bring
it back. Yep. Yes, sir, Commissioner.
Mike, how are these funds generated?
I didn't hear.
Commissioner Simmons asked, how are these funds generated?
They come from Lake Electric, from water wastewater, and from the general fund, and it seems like it was 250 from electric, 200 from water, wastewater combined, and then 50,000 from the general fund is the way it was originally created.
Is it a one-time generation or is it annual?
It's recurring.
Annually?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yep.
Any others?
With the idea that it will always be carried over for these types of reasons.
Well, thank y'all for being here. Thank you. Thank you all. Nice to meet you guys. Thank you, Katie. Thank you, Jason. Okay, so now we will move into, we've already discussed finance director, and then we have nothing under utility. So this is a time for the mayor and members of the commission to make any comments. Anybody have anything? Yes, Commissioner Music.
I will not be at the meeting on Monday. My son is getting engaged tonight, so we're flying, well, tomorrow. I did, she's in Indiana, and if she's listening to our commission meeting, then she deserves to know.
I bet she's not.
I bet she's not too. But anyway, so my wife and I are leaving up, and then our other son's coming, so we're gonna have a nice little time in Indiana, so.
We'll miss you.
On that segue, so we are down to 4 commissioners on Monday, so the remaining 4, I need to ensure that you will all be present for quorum.
I was
Commissioner
just the same as Commissioner Music. Happy Thanksgiving, everybody. The McLeod family is headed to Blue Ridge, Georgia on Sunday, so we'll be up there. Missed the meeting, and the others are here. But yeah, I just wanted to say Happy Thanksgiving and see you all when we get back.
Yes, so just to confirm, Commissioner Simmons, McCarley, Madden, and Reed, you all are our, okay, we're locking in.
Assuming
We're locking in for
nothing happens
Monday.
over the weekend, that's right.
Exactly.
I'm still here.
Good Lord willing, the creek don't rise.
Any other comments? Anything anybody wants to, other than Happy Thanksgiving?
I went to the water meeting yesterday, or the other day. It was interesting. You were there.
PRWC?
Yeah. And Bill was there, and Bill were both there. It was interesting to hear the different components of that. I'm not alternate, but water's a few issues that I thrive on anyway. But it was interesting to talk about water use and different things. And I made a comment to Bill. Unfortunately, and we had to go to a code enforcement meeting in Hillsborough County for some stuff we did wrong, I guess. But anyway, it amazed me of the Hillsborough County fines, specifically fines people who water on the wrong dates. I mean, they stick it to them. It's and that type of stuff. I know we don't. And I'm not encouraging that, but again, if our water becomes a bigger issue, then again, I don't know what to do about it, but invariably, it surprised me that we don't have some kind of something going on. But I just made that observation. I think people need to be aware of that. We need to be conservationists in our water, and it's going to cost us a lot more in the future. And the impact fees and stuff that I see coming up that we're going to be faced with in the future that our citizens are going to be, it's going to be a major impact on each one of our citizens in the future. And so we need to maybe get a little tighter grip on it right now so it won't cost so much down the road. And it's going to be passed on to the people coming in more so than the ones that are existing right now. So.
Okay, Commissioner Music.
Just one last thing. I was listening to the radio the other day. Barry was on there, and it was just neat to hear your backstory. I didn't realize how long you'd been around in the news, so it was just kind of neat to listen to you on there. So.
Was that the one with Julie Townsend?
Yes.
Yeah.
Awesome.
She was nice enough to invite us to be on her show.
Yeah.
It's good.
And that was a really nice article about Congressman Franklin. That was very well done. Thank you.
Good job.
All right, seeing no further business, we're adjourned. Happy Thanksgiving. Happy Thanksgiving.
See you Monday to wish you again.